Alright, so today we're going to learn the basics of ACX audio. ACX is the Audible, Amazon, and iTunes audiobook platform. It's very difficult to work with. A lot of narrators and authors have problems because they have to adhere to very strict guidelines. There's RMS, decibel levels. Don't worry, we're going to look into all of this. You need headroom before and after. I mean, they're very strict guidelines, so the quality control department of ACX rejects a lot of titles because they just need things to be perfect in order to be standardized. So, obviously, the best way to do this, if you have the money, is to pay a studio to take your narrated product, your whatever you've recorded, as professionally as possible, and have them process and master it out for you. But of course, if let's say you're only making $50 to $400 per finished hour, it may be difficult for you to spend $400 per finished hour on a studio to master it out. There are a lot of good studios that work for royalty share, or $100 per finished hour, or maybe less. If you're only making $50 per finished hour and you're working on royalty share yourself, definitely pitch royalty share. Okay, so let's get started. So we're going to use a couple different softwares. Any audio editing software of your choice works for the editing and initial processing. And then we're going to do what's called normalization in SoundForge. If you have other software that you use for audio processing, that's fine too. But for this, we're going to use SoundForge. Okay, so here we have just an audio sample. Okay, so let's say you, if you're narrating and doing this yourself, or a narrator you're working with, took their take of a chapter. This is unedited. It's got the mistakes and breaths and clicks and pops and everything, all right? So we've got that in here. So let's go ahead and...
Hello. You may recognize my voice from documentaries, other audiobooks.
Okay, just checking to see if it works. Okay, and I like to do what is called vocal writing because ACX is very strict on the decibel levels. So I want to make sure the sample, even before I start editing, has basic volume controls.
Hello. You may recognize my voice from documentaries, other audiobooks, or perhaps you've seen me in TV and movies.
So I'm setting this
authors
to never go below 0 decibels. Again, we're gonna fix all of this in post because you want peak of -3 actually before you submit to ACX. But right now, for processing purposes, I want to start with 0, and I've capped it off at 3, maybe 2 tops. Okay. The other thing I want to, this is in my actual chain here. So now we're gonna look at what's going on in the master plugin chain. Alright, and I don't have effects here. What I do have is a decibel meter. So per ACX standards, I have set the short max to -18, the short minimum to -23, my true peak max to -3, and my target at about -22.5, which is pretty close to -23. Again, this is pre-processing. This is not going to be the output. We are pre-processing before we start editing. And we just want to check the levels.
You may recognize my voice from documentaries, other audiobooks, or perhaps you've seen me in TV and movies. Publishers, authors, and producers.
It's going to do some correction. Once we're satisfied that everything is okay, we are going to render as a WAV file. Now, here's the trick, okay? Because ACX uses an MP3 format, and its minimum is only 192 kilobits per second. You can go up to 320, but they want a constant bit rate. And what that means is the quality is going to get squished down a little bit. So you actually do not want to work with a very, very, very high quality file to begin with, because what you're hearing then when you're editing, you may not get those nuances. You may get some overcompensation in the dynamics when you normalize. It's not going to sound perfect. Let's just put it that way. So I like to work with good old standard. I'm going to use a WAV file, 16-bit, not 24, not 36 float. I'm going to work at 16-bit, 44.1 kilohertz. So let's go ahead and call it. Now remember, this is our pre-process, so we're going to call it, let's say, Chapter 1, pre-process. Okay, WAV. Let it do its thing. Okay, so now we can go to editing. We can close this out. And as you can see, I'm using a different DAW for actual editing. Okay, so, and luckily it opened my template. So here's one of the most important things to remember with working with ACX. You want to have anywhere between half a second or 1 second leading silence. And at the end of the chapter, you want to have 1 to 5 seconds. I have 4 seconds here, just in case I don't want to put the edge of the very last word there. I get some playroom at the end. You don't want to forget those. They will kick it back to you. Okay, so let's get our, what did we call this puppy? Chapter 1, pre-processed. Okay, let it do its thing. Now, here's what I've got set up. I do a track EQ where, unless you want a James Earl Jones type voice, unless you're working with that kind of voice, you want to drop in the EQ most of this very low end. You also want to cut out a little bit, just a little bit of this mid-range, because it gives it that weird muffled tone. And you want to cut that out a little bit. You'll have to play by ear on this depending on how the voice you're working with sounds. Okay? And actually the one I'm working with now doesn't actually need much of this. We're going to use a track compressor, just basic, and just set the threshold in -3 decibels. I have my attack at 15 milliseconds and my release at 250. It almost doesn't matter for those. You can play those because we're gonna mess with things in post anyway. So -3 decibels, that's all that matters. And what I have here, because you'll notice a lot of narrators, including yourself if you're a narrator, when they finish a word, you can hear their tongue move, you hear their cheeks move, you can hear their lips move at the end of a phrase. They don't turn their head while breathing. You've got some P issues, some in between their words. So I put a noise gate in here. And again, I'm assuming there's no background noise because you'll have to do some different EQing and noise reduction that we're not going to cover here. We're assuming that this was recorded in a quiet room. And all right, so look at this. Here we go. So I've got my attack time at 3 milliseconds and my release time at 576. Okay, and you'll have to play with this to see what you like best. Okay, and then we start the editing process where you listen to it real time.
Hello. You may recognize my voice from...
And what we do here is we listen for mistakes. You will notice a professional narrator, when they make a mistake and have to repeat themselves, will click the stand 3 times, or they'll do with their tongue, and you'll be able to visually see that, and that means they're repeating themselves, and you can quickly go straight to those 3 dings, and you know there's a mistake before there, and it's going to be replaced with what's after. It speeds things up a lot. Another thing professionals you will see do is they make a noise, audible noise, when they page turn, where you can visually see it. So it's you know when those things are coming up, and you don't waste a lot of time with listening for initial processing. But basically you want to listen.
You may recognize my voice from documentaries.
You want to listen for mistakes. You want to listen to breaths, and every time you get one, you just simply cut it out. See that? I'm making dead air there.
other audiobooks,
and it cleans it up nicely. And you'll want to do this actually probably. See, this is speaking, this is silence. This is speaking, this is silence. Anytime you see any wave patterns, it's speaking, it's silence. It does not hurt to cut out all silence and chop it up. Then, when you're finally done, you're going to export this into another file. And we're going to call that edited. So it's the same thing, except this time it's called edited. And then comes the fun part. We open up our normalization. So, again, I'm using SoundForge here.
Hello. You may recognize my voice from documentaries, other audiobooks, or
Everything's
perhaps you've
already
seen me in TV and movies.
nicely stopping at
Publishers,
-3
authors,
decibels.
and producers approach me to work.
Now again, I do highly recommend if you don't have the budget for all this fancy software and plugins, or if this is too much work and you need to focus on your narration and other things, you definitely go to www.smarturl.it/ACX Studio. Again, smarturl.it/ACX Studio. I do highly recommend it if it's getting a bit much for you, because here comes the fun part, and this is where most of the work and the skill comes in. Now I've pre-processed this so this doesn't take an hour, but so the first thing we want to do is normalize. And I've pre-made an ACX audiobook thing, but see, I have set normalizing using average RMS level. I've ignored the floor between -60 decibels as per ACX standards. I have set the normalization rate to -20.23, 9.7% decibels. Okay, I've figured out by trial and error that this is actually best set up to start with. And if clipping occurs, apply dynamic compression. We're actually not going to get any because we pre-processed. Okay, and then we hit the OK button, let it do its thing.
Hello.
And here we go to dynamics. We're going to go to what's called graphic dynamics. This might be called compressor in your software. In Vegas, it's in SoundForge. It's called graphic dynamics. Okay. And I have set the threshold here to -5.9 decibels. It's experimental. This is where a lot of the trial and error comes in. Sometimes I've had to go through this dynamics pass 9-10 times, moving things around before I actually get the exact ACX numbers we're looking for, as you'll see. I've set the ratio to 2.2 to 1, the attack level at 1 millisecond, and the release at 500 milliseconds. Output gain is 0. You want to sync channel gains. And do this in real time. Again, smarturl.it/ACX Studio if you want to just drop this on a professional studio to just take care of this for you. That actually might work for royalty share if you're making less per finished hour as a narrator. So let's give it a shot. Hit OK. Let it do its thing. And now to check it, we go back to normalize. And we're not going to actually normalize again, but here's the beauty right here is scan levels. Now I scanned levels and it shows the peak is -4.2 and our RMS is -20. -4.2 peak is not going to work. Now technically it's under the -3. Remember, these are negative numbers, so the bigger it is, the less it is. Under -3 might technically be okay with ACX, but you don't want to take chances. You want this number to be exactly -3 dB, and you want the RMS number to be any number between -23 and -18. Okay, and we always hit cancel here. We've already normalized. We're just using this normalization module to scan the levels. Since that didn't work, we go undo, Undo graphic dynamics, go back to graphic dynamics, and minus 4.2 is too low for my taste. I want to bump it to minus 3, so in order to do that, I will actually raise the threshold. Now, let's go back and scan our levels. I got it to minus 3.6. So we want to undo. I want to raise the threshold again. You see, this is why professional studios charge so much. There is a lot of trial and error and a lot of know-how. I raise the threshold a little bit. Scan levels. 3.1. So I know all I have to do is raise it a little bit. Scan levels. Pa-pow! Alright, so, actually this does at 3.1, but to save you time and me doing this 10 times, I know in my head now to bump it up another point 0.2 on the threshold, and we'll get our minus 3 peak, RMS between minus 23 and minus 18. We are right in there. Great. So here comes, now we need to save this as, so I know they ask for 192 as the minimum. I use 256. I cut the difference. 320 kilobits per second is pretty nice quality. 192, but keep in mind you're also transferring files. I don't know what your internet speed is. 256 is definitely acceptable. Okay, so 256 kilobytes per second, 44.1 hertz. VBR is unchecked. We need a constant bit rate, and quality, of course, is highest quality. Stereo encoding, I do joint stereo, mid to side, and intensity. You might get away with just doing standard stereo or dual channel, but joint stereo is nice. ID3 settings if you use them, and then you hit OK, and you will get your MP3 that you use for submitting to ACX. Again, if this is a bit much, because all of this is necessary, ACX will keep kicking your MP3s back with QC errors. I do highly recommend you go to www.smarturl.it/ACX Studio. Okay, have a great one.